Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this week's episode of the PETHS Alumni Network podcast. I'm your host, Nathan, and today we have a very special episode with two 2017 grads, Natisha Ho and Shaqeel Sarif. To give a bit of intro, we'll start with ladies first. Natisha, so both of you graduated in 2017. You then went on to U of T to study biochemistry and immunology. You did your master's in chemistry, and now you're working at Evoco, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Lots of product development, things like that, I assume. And then Shaqeel, for you went to TMU, you studied business, you got your bachelor's of commerce, and now you're working at AT Financial Group. And we talked a little bit offline, you have some experience working for Scotiabank, some startups. So I'm really looking forward to hearing, the contrast between the two. So I guess my first question for both of you is, what were some key moments from high school?
Honestly, I think a lot of the key moments between him and I are just, we used to Skype call all the time because we had a lot of trauma growing up and we were each other's support system. Like, I genuinely don't think I would have made it out alive without him. And some people that might be watching this, in our year might not really think that we were going through stuff, but it was a lot of behind the scenes after school tears and a lot of patience. So I think that's just like my personal highlight for high school. If we're really getting into some of the highlights in terms of classes or extracurriculars, I'd say one of the greatest things was I was a part of Creates. I now know that it's not necessarily purely a Trudeau High School organized event now. It's more collaborative, cross-functional across other high schools. It's a leadership conference, and it helped to basically bring other people out of their shell, brought me out of my shell as well. And it was a good opportunity for, I guess, us to be in a community and get a chance to know each other outside of class, outside of an academic environment. And yeah, that was pretty much like the two main things that I remembered from high school.
Yeah, I'd say adding on to that, definitely Natisha was a huge support mechanism for me. And, it always went back and forth. There was a huge focus on academic excellence, definitely within the school and at home. And that was one area that was always a bit of a struggle for me. For me, I was never so much academically inclined as I was to just get out there and work. I would say one of my bigger takeaways from high school is, especially grade 11, grade 12, but even prior to that, I had been actually skipping a lot of my classes to day trade. And I taught myself to day trade, and it panned out pretty nicely. But for the most part, while everyone's focused on these academic side of things, I really got into the whole investing aspect, and especially around the realm of understanding that academics aren't everything, Right. And definitely a huge shout out to the guidance counselors at the time. Miss McKegg was an absolute gem. But I'm not entirely sure if I would have been able to sort of find that route without the right support mechanisms.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm glad you two touched on, the idea of helping each other out. That's something that kind of unites us all. And that's kind of why I want to start this page, and I think, Shaqeel, you touched on it, like, education isn't everything, right? And I think at such a rigorous school like PET, it's easy to forget that. And, you mentioned day trading. I think we could make like a whole other episode on that. So we'll kind of gloss. It's not something for everyone, right? It takes a lot of skill, a lot of risk appetite, things like that. So I'm kind of curious. You two mentioned that you help each other out through a lot of the subjects, right? At what point did it kind of like diverge between studying science and like business for the two of you, or were you always able to like kind of help each other out in their respective courses?
You want to go ahead first?
Sure. I think a lot of the overlap came in the mandatory courses, the ones that you could not avoid if you wanted to get into certain universities. I got a lot of support from Natisha on those for sure. And I would say past the actual courses themselves, because of course we're going through two different programs. Yes, there's a lot of overlap in courses, but the emotional toll that certain academics can take on you doesn't matter where you're headed or how. It's the same emotion. It's kind of like the notion that, stress, your body can't differentiate where the stress is coming from. You're either stressed or you're not. And if you are, it's better to sort of have those mechanisms than to be lost without them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. I think he's giving me too much credit, to be honest, because like slight deviation off of the main topic, but Shaq and I met grade 9 math class. And this was like the first class of the first semester of grade 9. So I guess like that's where our paths like met. And then I remember watching this guy come into the after school tutoring or after school kind of like math help. And, he was so motivated to do better, even though he probably had like the second lowest or lowest score in the class. And we're not talking about PETHS standards. We're not talking about 80s. We're talking about like barely passing.
Yeah.
And we laugh about it now too, but I mean, I was sitting there like so depressed because I was like, oh my God, I didn't do that well. And he's sitting there with a smile on his face, knowing that he could do better. And it was like a click of a mindset of like, we're learning something from each other. So taking it back to the original question, I'd say that because we were pursuing two very different paths, we learned a lot from each other. I think I would always tell him some cool science facts, and he would also tell me some science facts because he knows I would appreciate it. And then I'd always ask him questions about, like, how are you doing this day trading and stuff? And then vice versa. And it was just a lot of it was not only share of like knowledge, but it was a sharing and understanding in how we perceive a lot of things that we were surrounded with. So I guess like overall, we also found like most exciting when we were discussing things that overlapped both business and science. I think at one point we joked about owning a pharma company together. Yeah. So like it was just, like playing around with like those ideas, getting, we were kids, so getting like kind of imaginative.
Yeah, and now that you mention it too, definitely finding that common ground in really unique or niche ways. I remember there were times that we spoke about things like the science of human nature and how that pertains to making business decisions.
Yeah.
And the science of psychology and understanding how people are thinking before they're making any kind of purchases or sales in that sense. And just being able to find someone to connect with at those levels were really helpful too for growth on either side.
Yeah, I felt like this wasn't exactly a common occurrence like on the day-to-day for others. So like that's why him and we've been friends to this day, because I honestly don't have that interaction a lot, or don't have necessarily opportunity a lot like while I'm in like the classes I was at the time. So kind of how it happened.
Yeah, I think you raised a good point about that kind of cross functional kind of like the performance and the productivity that comes out of that, right? Like we live in such an interconnected world that it's important to be able to talk intelligently about other subject areas, right? I kind of always make the joke on the podcast that like business kids don't really know how the world works. Like if someone gets hurt or something, business kids are useless, right? In the vast majority of senses, right? So I kind of started this podcast, I wanted to learn more about science, so I can talk intelligently about things that are going on, things like that, right? So it's a very good point that you raised. So Shaqeel, we heard from you about, the interest in day trading, right? Did you kind of grow up in a very, business focused household? Like when was kind of business introduced to you?
So I wouldn't say business focused as much. I give credit to my dad. He was the one that was always into investing and growing wealth. And he was the one that started the notion in my mind of, it doesn't matter what job you work, as long as you know how to invest and you know how to take care of your finances. You could work at McDonald's for the rest of your life and you'll still retire well off. And so for him, he was the one that got me into investments and day trading. I remember even as early as the age of 12, I just saved up a bunch of cash and birthday money. And my first investment was actually in silver. And I can send you a picture of me at 12 holding my first bar of silver. And it was at 15 where I sold that, and then I got into day trading with some initial guidance from my dad. Granted, he was a lot less risk taking than I was in a lot of what I've learned, but definitely started around that age and just built up from there.
Mm-hmm. How much of it would you say is like you like read books about it, and how much would you say like you just need to do it yourself?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think at the beginning, a lot of it is really understanding and studying it, and then a lot of paper trading too. You know, I wouldn't recommend day trading to anyone really. I'm in the financial industry. I've seen how this goes. It takes a very specific type of person because there are a lot of gains, but there's also a lot of losses. And really, when things are going up, if it's just a bull market, then you're not a genius. But and you can really take some expensive lessons from there. But really, a lot of people say, paper trade until, and just for context, if paper trading isn't a common term, you're basically trading with a fake account with fake money. A lot of people say, oh, paper trade until you make a lot of money consistently. I actually think the opposite. I think paper trade until you're losing money consistently, because then you've gotten more to learn from, right?
Yeah.
Again, in a market where you're constantly winning, like a bull market, almost every trade you do is going to be winning, and you're not going to learn much from that. You're going to learn more from those losing trades. So do some reading at the beginning, understand what you're playing with and what you're buying into, and then paper trade before you even attempt it with even a dime. And even then, it's still a high risk, high reward situation.
Mm-hmm. I think you raised a good point. That's applicable to like anything, right? Like, you learn more from your losses than you do your wins, right? Like if you're playing in the basketball league where everyone's way better than you, I think you learn a lot more than if you're just winning all the time, right?
100%.
So on the flip side, Natisha, you studied biochemistry at U of T, right? What was kind of your first exposure to science and chemistry specifically?
To be honest with you, I think initially started out as the typical Asian household mindset. It's like nothing new in, the realm of pet and, the city that we were living in. So I guess like when I told this guy about like my parents and being very I want to call it I wouldn't call it like overbearing, but they were also, let's just like assume it's like high expectations of me fulfilling a profession that would lead to healthcare of some sort or science in a way. That's kind of the path that I defaulted to initially. And then I think at some point, I think especially when, we were kind of like talking about science in like a really fun way after school, like, and just I was like hearing like all these cool things in class that some of the teachers were kind of showing around. And I realized like, okay, what I'm actually doing is actually genuinely enjoyable. And I knew kind of what I was good at, and honestly leveraging those skills led me to want to pursue a career in science. And that every time I think I asked myself that question, kind of like checkpoints throughout, not even just the year, but like year by year, it's like, is this still what I want to do? Is this still what I want to do? Do I want to pivot? Do I want to pivot? And that constantly was, no, yes, this is what I want to do. No, I don't want to pivot. If I'm pivoting, maybe I pivot instead of, let's say physics. I was not good at physics. My grade 12 physics mark will definitely reflect that. Sorry, I love you, Mr. Baker.
Mm-hmm.
But at least I could pivot off and say, okay, I'm not going to do anything with physics. I kind of know my place. So that was kind of the path going into the science realm. And I think life science specifically was just something that I stuck to because it was all I've ever known. If you pivot off of your kind of undergrad life science into like healthcare, it's definitely different. But a lot of that was definitely curated because of the, I would say the courses as well as the community that I had at U of T. So that was quite enriching, and a lot of the raw science is applicable everywhere. And so it's kind of how I stuck to it till this day. And not to say that I'm bound by it, because I'm always having this mindset of is it still what I want to do? You know, I wake up and if I don't like it, then I know I have the liberty to try something different and take active steps towards that.
I think that's super valuable. You know, sometimes when you're, you know, 18, you feel like you're making the decision for the rest of your life, right? But I guess being honest with yourself and knowing what you like is super important. So you fast forward a little bit to U of T, right? But my question is for you, you know, why U of T? Did you consider other schools as well?
Yeah, so I mean, I think getting a little bit personal here, I didn't really have a lot of options only because I was financially restricted. You know, my parents came here and they were immigrants with not any money at all. So having to uh, pick schools that were close to home was really important for me. And that kind of narrowed it down to schools that offered a life science program but were still close to home. I think I kept it to Ontario Tech University. Um, and then it was U of T and then Waterloo because I had to have a third option, but I knew that even if I got into Waterloo, I'd have to do a lot more work, maybe apply to more scholarships. But the other half of it, I'd say, is I didn't want to pivot so far away from my family because at the end of the day, it's just my sister, myself, and my parents here. We don't have any extended family, no friend. Like my family doesn't have any friends or anything like that. There's not a really like large community for us. So if anything happens, I have to be there. I am the oldest sibling too, so it's kind of coming from that place as well, I'd say. So
Mhm.
those factors kind of played into why I did apply to U of T. And I think U of T, I guess, has like a pretty um, notorious image for being, you know, prestigious, and the programs are supposedly. I say this, but like it is true to a degree. Like so I say supposedly to help you get a job because it's a well recognized institution. Um, so I think all in that kind of helped me secure U of T as my option to go to school. And I think that my experience there was definitely self-made. So coming from, you know, commuting and having to like establish all of these like uh, new relationships and interactions, and like also these experiences, right? Like coming from a place of like no connections prior, any friends like around me, it was nothing short of what I had dealt with before anyway. I used to move a lot when I was a kid, so that wasn't daunting for me. So yeah, I think U of T in general was just well suited for my situation at the time.
Right.
And it's something that I did struggle with a lot because I didn't necessarily wanted to go to U of T if I had like, you know, didn't have these restrictions. But I definitely don't regret it now, like growing up and looking back and everything. So it was it may not have been the choice that I wanted, but it was definitely the choice that I needed at the time. And I'm happy with like all the experiences that have built me up to who I am today.
Yeah, very nice. It definitely reflects, you know, strong sense of accountability, responsibility, things like that. And then, so on the other hand, Shaqeel, we talked a little bit offline. You decided to take a gap year, right? You know, we talked a little bit about these kind of unconventional kind of paths, right? Like, what was the decision, or what was the decision making process like for you?
So it was interesting. So there was a piece that I didn't mention initially, but basically right out of high school, sorry, I applied to a few different places. I got into Laurier for business as well. And I had gone there, you know, I was sort of doing the thing that all the parents expect you to do, which is, you know, go to a pretty well-known university, get your degree, and then get out into the workforce. So I was there for about 6 months, but at the same time, I was still commuting back to Markham pretty much every weekend to work. And I wasn't working anywhere special. I was really working at Whole Foods. And the commute and just the academic side of it kind of all got to me because I knew I could be doing bigger and better things. So after going to Laurier for about 4 or 5 months and being tired of commuting, I decided to just cut it off for some time, dropped out of Laurier, and then I went and I applied into Scotiabank. And at first, didn't hear back, took a couple months, and I ended up getting a job as a teller. And from there, I fell in love with my work. After about 3 months, I had enough sales referrals that they promoted me to Universal Banker. And about 4 or 5 months after that, I was talking to the branch manager, and decent number of sales as a Universal Banker. He basically told me, if you can get your securities license, then we're more than happy to put you in an office and have you be a financial advisor. So that was the first real glimpse of, okay, I can really live a life without a degree necessarily. And I went that route. I ended up getting my securities course. They made me a financial advisor. I was the youngest in the district, and licensed at the age of 18. And really going into that, I did that job. It was a phenomenal job for about 1.5 years. And I realized that the thing that I was missing at the end of the day, funny enough, was a degree. I tried to move out of that role, and I still wanted a degree because in my mind, it was almost a mindset shift. So there was something that changed in the sense of now looking at the playing field in terms of the job market. A degree isn't something that gives you an edge. Your personality, your experiences give you an edge, but a degree puts you at baseline because there's so many people that have them, at least when it comes to industries that aren't labor-based. And I think that's an important piece too. A lot of people think that you need a degree. I don't think that's true. I think there's a huge market for labor and construction, plumbing, any of that. But to be at least in the business industry, unless you're going to be doing something by yourself, you typically need that just to be at base level. So when I did finally realize that after about 2 total years at Scotiabank, it clicked that I just needed to get it done. Doesn't matter how much I liked or disliked academics. I ended up quitting my job at Scotiabank to pursue it full time. And it was full time to the point of 6 courses every semester, including summer, until it was done. So cleared it in about between 2.5 and 3 years, and then back out into the market again. But the main piece being that when I was going through that, starting off, I wanted nothing to do with academics, and it really was just a mindset shift that brought me back into that world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really great story, talking about the drive, that you had and recognizing, what you were like well suited for, right? And then I guess kind of, just because you closed that door at one point in time doesn't mean you can't reopen that door at another time, right?
Yeah.
So both of you decided to stay, in the city. Would you kind of recommend that to kids? Like how is moving to the city? Do you feel like you kind of missed out on like, going to like a school where everyone lives there? Because you both went to commuter school. Like, I know that you don't have any regrets, but like, do you feel like you missed out in certain aspects of that life?
That's a really interesting question. I definitely have thought about it before, because I mean, there were schools out there that, I was just interested in because of their program. I was very like oriented academically just for myself. So having a really great program, at least I believed would really help support my education. Right. So I think moving to another city would have been really daunting for me at the time because I've never really lived anywhere before that alone, even like away from my parents, So I don't think I would have necessarily been comfortable with it. But I wouldn't have been opposed for, especially when I was going through my schooling and I was commuting. I was just thinking, yeah, it would have been really nice to like at least stay on campus, and kind of be in that community, live that life for a little bit. It is a very different experience. I don't know. What do you think?
So having moved out to Laurier for the 6 months, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that freedom, that sense of self, and the autonomy that I had, without anyone asking, oh, where are you going? What time are you going to be back home? I just got to live for a little bit in that bubble. Personally, I would recommend it. I think a lot of people just need to get out more, and especially in a day and age where we're surrounded by screens, to just step aside from all that and live by yourself. The tough part, I think, comes in is self-regulation, and I think that's something that you have to build into, and you're going to have dysregulation for some time until one day it just clicks of like, okay, what am I doing? Because nobody's keeping you accountable, especially if you come from a home of people that are expecting a lot from you, high achievers. There's always going to be something that they're expecting next, and that you almost have a pressure to do. And the second those standards are dropped, it's very easy to fall into a doom spiral of doing nothing and
Right.
going through that. But I think it's a natural state of things. It's a natural flow of how things will go. So the earlier the better, because get that out of the way at the beginning and learn from it as you grow older.
That's true.
So you went to Laurier at first, right? Did you explore going back to Laurier? What were the considerations the second time around, or where you went into school?
Well, the second time around was coming out of Scotiabank. I wanted something that was nearby, and this was primarily just because most of my funds were still tied up in the market. Right? For me, because that priority has always been, investing or trading or whatever it is on that front. If I can keep much of my funds tied up there, right? I know compound interest is on my side, and let's do that. So in this case, Ryerson, or now Toronto Metropolitan, was the easier option because it's right there. I could live at home, and I could even work part-time while I was doing it, and reduce the amount sort of leaving that side of things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great story. Yeah, I can appreciate how both of you, took a lot of things, into consideration. You didn't just kind of like blindly pick, like some people do. So I'm glad there's, kind of some rationale behind those kind of things. So Natisha, you went on to do your master's, right? At what point did you decide that a master's was right for you?
I think that it's funny because I actually recently went to like a couple of alumni events for university, and I've been asked this question, but I still like don't really have like a straight answer because, to be honest, so I don't know. Based on timeline, I think for those of you who are doing the math, I kind of did my master's during COVID, and so that was a different experience because the year before when I was applying, couldn't predict COVID. Like I wanted to do a master's because I was really interested in research at one point. I had some really great professors at U of T that were gearing me towards that direction. And I was really excited because the lab bench work that I was doing really supported my theory and understanding within the courses, which, I mean, for some people, they might think, oh, well, she probably was always really smart growing up. That's not true. I actually had to work really hard to attain the results that I wanted. And even then, I knew that I had kind of like a threshold that some people that maybe, are able to learn faster or something, they might be able to like go beyond that. So helping myself understand how to be successful in these academics was through research, asking a lot of questions, and that environment was kind of like a playground for me. So having to venture into research even further meant that I did need to have some sort of extra, I call it like training, because your master's and PhD is really to train you on how to answer questions that are still out there, right? That's why research exists. And so they train brilliant minds and to attack these problems, and that's why you become a very valuable asset. This is just mostly for research-based positions. I'm not talking about, for some other positions it could be very different. So I think that kind of allowed me to pave towards, getting my own project in my undergrad, doing an undergraduate thesis, to then transitioning to my master's. And some people, you may have like a question, because I get to ask this a lot, like, why did you decide to do a PhD afterwards, right? It was very easy for my program. So for those of you who may not be aware, the Department of Chemistry at U of T, there's an option to transition to the PhD program. You just have to, get a letter saying, yeah, this person is a good candidate for the PhD program, and you basically would continue after that. Or you can apply directly into PhD from undergrad. I didn't want to do that latter option because I still wanted to figure out if I wanted to do research. I was exposed to it very newly, and master's was a good way for me to trial it and see if I wanted to continue it or if I just wanted to jump into the workforce. And that's kind of what happened afterwards. I jumped into the workforce afterwards because I just wanted to kind of test the waters in the industry, because I've been in academia all of like my life. I just needed like a slight change of environment. And so that's why I'm working in an R&D startup now. So definitely the master's skill set that I obtained was important. But I think for the most part, it's not that much more different compared to what I was doing in my undergrad. And that's, again, depending on how proactive you are and what opportunities you were seeking, essentially, and the kind of support you had. So that's sort of the mindset and the steps that I took going into pursuing my master's.
Mm-hmm. So you read my mind. You answered the next two questions I was going to ask you about, getting a PhD, things like that, staying in academia, that kind of thing. But you talked about the workforce, which I want to kind of transition into, right? So I believe both of you both work at startups, right? Like you have experience at startups, right? And that's kind of like a huge topic right now in the world we live in. So starting with Shaqeel, like you worked at like a huge institution at Scotiabank, right? What made you kind of want to transition from such a big company to a startup?
So a few things. Definitely the bureaucracy of a corporation kind of takes a lot out of you. And I had a great experience working at Scotiabank. The people I worked with were phenomenal, but there was always something missing. I mean, you could be hitting a sales target and the question would be, well, you didn't hit your calls this week. Okay. So, and it really, there's no differentiator between quantity and quality. It's kind of just, here's your metrics, hit your metrics on every front. Otherwise, we'll dock a point here. And that kind of drove me a little nuts, right? I'm somebody that loves creative freedom, that loves to basically do, whatever I feel has the best outcome in terms of quality and in terms of what's best for the people that I'm working with and working for. And so it prompted me to sort of take a step back from the bureaucratic side of things and find other avenues. And specifically in terms of this startup, it's kind of an interesting way that I got into it. So the startup I was with was called Glimmer Health Technologies or Glimmer Health Incorporated, sorry. And pretty much the way that it started was there was this company I was invested in, and at its peak, it was actually a gaming company. At its peak, it was $1 billion in valuation. And at some point, the CEO had left. And when the CEO left, it irked me a little bit because, of course, markets don't like to see when a CEO leaves a company. Anyways, I saw on his Twitter that he left to start a health therapy company, Glimmer. And I actually DM'd him initially looking to invest in Glimmer. He'd done pretty well the first time, had a decent exit. And what ended up happening was we get on a call to discuss and go over, okay, what does the investment on my side look like into this company? And he's showing me the product and sort of pointing out different areas that they're working on. And at the same time, I'm having ideas as to how they can improve. I share my thoughts about oh, maybe you could improve this. Maybe you could look for clients in this area. Have you thought about this? And next thing you know, the call goes from me investing in them to him offering me a job to work there. So it was kind of a cool transition in the sense of I didn't go into this looking for a job. And I think a lot of the best opportunities I've come across in my life, I didn't go in looking for. They kind of just showed up. And whether it was sheer luck or, some sort of a higher power, if you will, I think it's really important to always be open to see those opportunities. And, going into a startup, especially one where they don't have sales processes built out or anything on that front, it's scary, it's terrifying, but it's also the kind of thing that personally I really feed off of, right? If I have an opportunity to build, then I'm going to try and take it. And that was a night and day difference from Scotiabank. Hence the reason I was so keen on it.
Mm-hmm. So my takeaways were you were obviously informed about the CEO and his new product, and you had the belief in him, but also like you were driven to reach out, make that connection, but also you offered, help, right? People always are willing to listen to people who want to offer help, right? And eventually that transition into something more. And Natisha, you mentioned before you work at an R&D development company. Can you kind of tell us about a little bit more about what it is you do, what kind of products they're developing, things like that?
Sure. So you mentioned earlier, yeah, I work at Evoco. We're a biomaterials company based in Toronto, specifically the Mars Discovery District, which, if you may have not heard, we're sort of a mini innovation hub in downtown, located directly in the center. Across from UC, it's where the old Toronto General Hospital was. Lots of startups there, not just myself or my company. And we're connected to, a lot of hospitals. So a lot of therapeutic technologies as well, medical devices, things like that. And I think when I was going into the job search, my job search was a little bit more difficult to network because it was a combination of I didn't know where to go to talk to people, other than, just like blindly going up to people on LinkedIn and just saying, hey, I want to know about your company, or just, cold direct messaging them, things like that. The other half of it was obviously trying to follow up on LinkedIn applications or Indeed applications, any job website, if you will. So I think diving into like what I do for the startup, it's still relatively in, I'd say, not super early stages, but we're in the stages where we're doing pilot plants and manufacturing. And so there's a lot of sides of the business that I get to see, a lot of cross-functional responsibilities that I have. They always say like, oh, at a startup, you wear multiple hats, but I like to think of it as opportunities, because I think for my personal career development, I wanted to kind of tiptoe away from the lab side, and I started wanting to pursue science communication a little bit more, wanting to, learn more about the other parts of a business. And that, again, that was through our conversations. I think we supported that quite a bit. So we develop a lot of materials that are for different applications like footwear, automotive, you name it. And we're just trying to essentially not reinvent the fire, as my manager sometimes calls it, but we want to basically provide high performance alternatives that are bio-based, that are, adhering to new policies that are coming into the workplace now. So a lot of companies are starting to move towards greener policies, things like that. And eventually, at some point, those really large corporations are going to have to adopt these kind of sustainable technologies, whether they like it or not, right? And that's why we're here. We're here to kind of disrupt the current market, because people may not necessarily think that we are needed, and try to basically be a good contender that, again, won't compromise performance, but also provide something that consumers can believe in as well. I mean, a lot of greenwashing is out there, so we're trying not to be that. And yeah, like I think for an R&D like environment, it's very much trial and error. A lot of expectation is that we do have to meet certain targets for our clients' expectations. So my day to day for like that is very different, but the overall goals are the same. And pivoting and having to basically stay on my toes is pretty much where exactly where I want to be, and getting a chance to learn in my role how to communicate and support the business aspect, which I do. It's a little bit of like business development in that sense, is exciting, and this is exactly where I want it to be.
Amazing to hear. So both of you touched on that product development, right? Being at the forefront of product development, and a common theme, not only on this podcast but in the world right now is AI, right? Like it's a huge buzzword right now. How has it affected both of your industries?
It's funny. I just came out of a group meeting today and we were talking about AI. We are trying to actually implement AI into our company because we are a materials like goods company. So AI would be most useful and also maybe most detrimental to providing new innovative solutions to existing technologies, predicting models and properties that we're trying to achieve and things like that. So that's kind of a good tool, but also sometimes may steer us in the wrong direction because we all know AI is still, it's not perfect, it's still developing. And a lot of our work, at the end of the day, it's not going to render us totally obsolete because AI can't really think of everything, because AI works to mostly have existing knowledge, and we're trying to see if we can find patterns in the work that we've done to help us steer or be steered in the right direction. So I'd say that's like pretty much how AI has like mostly positively influenced the workplace for Evoco. What about you?
So AI is an interesting one. So I'm being at AT Financial now. It's as a independent broker, it's a highly regulated industry. So anything that has to do with the Ontario securities or Ontario financial, protections, there's a lot of red tape to go through when it comes to this. So in terms of the actual product, in terms of investments and that sort of thing, I know there are some fund managers that are just starting to implement AI, but in terms of the industry itself, not as much. Where we use AI mostly is in, let's say we're doing a reach out message to clients, or we're doing a marketing plan to, either create text, create posters, that sort of thing. We see a lot of the use there. We're also getting into the realm of content creation, and AI has just been super helpful with editing, with transcripting meetings, and that sort of thing. That's been really helpful. Definitely less use than when I was at the startup. When I was at the startup, it was night and day. We actually, towards the end, were using AI to even reach out and text some people, just follow up, see how they're doing, see if we can secure another appointment, that sort of thing. And that was really cool because you could just feed it past scripts. You can feed it past text messages and it would understand and basically be a copy of another salesperson. It had its hiccups, and I always had a lot of fun trying to break it and see what words I could give it to just completely derail it. But definitely in the areas that are less regulated, it is almost scary how good it's coming out now. Even just before I had left that last company, they were coming out with a technology where you could actually talk to it and it was sounding like an actual person. And at the time, this was before GPT-4o came out with the very human-like voice. This sounded even more human than that, and it wasn't even out to the public yet. So it was mind-blowing, a lot of these private companies, how they're using it. But yeah, I think There's going to be some serious implications for it in the years to come. We're starting to see that in the US primarily. There's a lot less red tape around it there. But yeah.
So both of you, alluded to, that way of the future, right? I think we're kind of coming up to that, right? So, one of the questions I always ask is, what are some future aspirations that both of you have? It can be professionally, education, starting your own business, volunteering, traveling, anything like that.
I'll be honest with you, like as Shaqeel and I are thinking, there was a point where we didn't really think about our future, maybe a little dark, but it's because there were a lot of things that happened, and I think some of us or some of you viewers are watching might be able to relate to. You get to the lows in your life, and it's a question that everyone's obviously always worried about, right? Even on a small scale, like what are you going to eat tomorrow? If you're like having to, work all day and you need to figure out what you got to cook, to like, what are you going to do in the next 10 years? So that question is like, I first want to say like, it is a privilege to be able to think about that. And this question, if you were to ask me 10 years ago when I was still in high school, I had such like a solid plan. I think Shaq probably like was like, oh yeah, she knew exactly what she wanted, like this year. This is like the timeline. But like a couple years ago, like there was so much that happened that it's really hard to answer this question now because my life has been so different. So that's why I feel like this question's scary even for us, that maybe you guys are watching. You're like, well, but you're alumni, you have jobs and like, you're on track and everything. But yeah, I don't know if you can comment on that at all.
I think that was very well said. I think you're absolutely correct in the sense that, yeah, there definitely was a time where it was more so a question of, okay, I need to make it to the next day and just keep the cycle going until I can break out of whatever this is. And having the life experience that I have now, I think a big piece of it in terms of aspirations and what I want from the future is just to be healthy and well enough and in a good state of mind that I can take on opportunities as they come.
Yeah.
There's everything that I've planned hasn't happened. Everything that was unplanned and the opportunities that came from it, those were the rewards from that were immeasurable, or they are immeasurable, and they still happen on a day-to-day basis. So to be well enough to accept them, to be educated enough to go through with them, a lot of it is thanks to luck. And I really define luck as when preparation meets opportunity. So being prepared enough to allow that opportunity to come into my life, but nothing super specific.
Right. No, that's some great perspective. I think that's super applicable, to everyone at, any stage of their life. Like I had someone on the podcast one time, they said, when you're in kindergarten, you think that the grade ones are so big. And then when you're in like grade 5, you think the grade 8s are so big, right? And then I'm sure when you're in grade 12, you think that, people who are working are so big, right? And they have everything figured out. When a lot of the time, what I've learned from this podcast is people really don't have it all figured out, right? A lot of people are just trying to get through to the next day. So that's some great perspective and great color on advice for anyone at any stage of their life. And along with that theme of advice, do you have any other like words of wisdom for anyone watching?
Yeah, I've got some, definitely. In a world where tech is evolving as quickly as it is, I think it's becoming harder and harder to make yourself stand out from like an academic perspective or from even to some degree a work ethic perspective. But I think a lot of people are going to be seeking out a very realness of an individual. And whether that's expressing yourself through your views, whether that's expressing yourself as, a core value to the work that you do. So for example, the work I do now, it's still financial based, except it's as an independent advisor, it's not with a specific company. I get access to everything. My goals are to be there to help people support themselves financially and have that freedom for themselves down the line. I think holding true to your core values and making that be the reason that you're chasing whatever dreams that you are is a big one. And I think another huge one that's versatile, and this has helped me immensely in any of the roles that I've done, is two classes I'd recommend people take: improv and public speaking. And those two, I never wanted to do them. I never wanted to do improv specifically. I always thought it was kind of odd and it made me uncomfortable. And it came down to the fact this is why I need to do it, is because it makes me uncomfortable. But being comfortable with that discomfort and being able to go up and speak to people and present yourself and present who you really are once again tools that are immeasurable, but help in nearly every situation, both on a personal relationship perspective to a business perspective.
I 100% agree with Shaq's experiences. His experiences are like something that I'm truly inspired by. Like every time that we share, give like a little life updates. We're always trying to better ourselves in some way, shape, or form, and I think it's really valuable to take that in because, a lot of people coming from PET are really academically driven, like we've said countless of times. So just doing something that makes you uncomfortable is probably one of the only ways that you'll be able to grow. And whether that's within your career or your personal life, whatever that may be, you're going to take that experience and that's going to carry with you across all future opportunities, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, echoing what Shaq said, doing something uncomfortable, and he gave some really great suggestions. And I think the other thing is that having perspective is really important. And the only way that you can gain perspective is if you are willing to sit and learn and have, the opportunity to just hear about other people's perspectives, as well as learning from others, their advice, things like that. Because at the end of the day, having an open mind will bring in opportunities. And that if somebody is, looking for, the next big thing, or they want to progress in their career, they have to really have that mindset. I'm strongly supporting this point because I think thinking back to like myself when I was younger and I just thought, okay, school is all I ever knew. And doing school, I think is very linear and you think that it might just get you to where you need to be in university and university to, a job to like family, etc. Isn't always the best kind of mindset to have. So when you have all these perspectives, you start to gain a lot more understanding, and that in itself will help you and your mindset when you go into tackling challenges in the future. I think it's very reflective, even in my current workplace, where people who had, a very linear kind of day or decided to think about it linearly tend to lose, a part of the main point in, let's say, a discussion or a project. And so how you will succeed is if you really exhausted all your resources, and if you, are willing to take on any criticisms as well as any learnings or teachings that others may have. Even if they don't have as much experience, you can always learn from literally anybody.
Right. Yeah, that's something, that definitely resonates with me. I've learned from every guest, who's been on here about life lessons, subject areas I didn't know about, things like that. And I'm glad you talked about the idea, not everything's linear, right? Especially how it relates to, a lot of expectations that, kids at PET have.
Kristen Price.
Yeah, that's a good one.
She is one of our near and dear friends. She's an absolute boss babe. Like I think her journey is crazy, and I think she's such like a I want to say wild personality, but I don't want to say it's chaotic. It's like organized chaos. Sometimes maybe not as organized, but we absolutely love her. I think she's the true inspiration.
I 100% back that name.
You know, the diversity at PET, you can find, you know, people who are interested in the same thing as you, have values the same as you, and you know, I think it really, you know, unites everyone and brings everyone up, right? So, you know, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for both of your insights today on, you know, the ideas of, you know, day trading. That was something that I took away, you know, something, you know, not for everyone, you know, but, you know, the idea of risk taking, you know, seeking those opportunities, right? You know, going out there, knocking on doors, things like that, providing value to other people, but also, you know, being responsible, being accountable with your own actions, you know, the choices that you make, and that last, you know, perspective on, you know, how lucky we are to plan the next few, you know, years is something that I think, you know, I didn't even realize that when I asked that, you know, it's something we take for granted. So thank you for all your insights. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and we'll see everyone next week. Peace out.